Programs usually seen at this time will not be shown today so that we may bring you the following special program.
The shades are being drawn on one of the most historic days in the nation's history. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom is virtually over. It fulfilled, in its size and tone, the most prayerful expectation of its organizers. Whether it will accomplish its immediate objective, passage of President Kennedy's Civil Rights Program by Congress, is another matter. You are seeing, and millions in Europe are seeing, the crowd dispersing at the Lincoln Memorial. Next, a meeting between the President and the leaders of the Civil Rights March. The crowds are spilling away from Lincoln Memorial in Washington now, music in the background, as the 200,000 marchers who converged on Washington from every corner of the nation this morning now face the tasks of getting back to their homes. They have been urged from the beginning of the plans for the march to try to be out of the nation's capital by 8 p.m. this evening. Much of this will depend on whether a railroad strike, a threatened railroad strike, can be averted. All indications are that it will be. The day has been remarkably peaceful and quiet. Only 3 arrests. One, a member of the American Nazi Party, another, a white man who attempted to take a placard from the hands of one of the demonstrators, and a third arrest, the details of which are not known. A number of people were overcome by heat and fainted, all treated and, so far as we know, released. 2 persons confined to hospitals with appendicitis attacks. A bomb scare, but a scare only, in the Washington Monument. And now let's go to Lincoln Memorial and NBC's Ray Scherer. Somewhere in that crowd is NBC's Ray Scherer, who has momentarily been separated from his microphone. You are hearing a group sing what has become the anthem of the civil rights movement in the United States, "We Shall Overcome," a song written a great many years ago by John Wesley. The task now is for these people to get back to the buses, hundreds of them, parked in different areas of Washington, that will take them back to both the large cities and the tiny hamlets across the nation. Also trains at Union Station in Washington. An earlier report said at least 1,700 persons had gathered at the Union Station even before the ceremonies at the memorial ended, possibly because they could not hear the speakers, possibly because the day had grown rather warm, and also possibly rather long. As you can see, the crowd spilled all over the grounds of the Lincoln Memorial and along either side of the reflecting pool, back down to the Washington Monument, where the march began. Leaders of the Civil Rights March met earlier in the day with leaders of both parties in both houses of Congress. The Speaker of the House, Democrat John McCormick, raised some spirits by telling them that if a bill outlawing discrimination in employment should be added to the President's Civil Rights Program, it could be passed by the full House. The House, however, has taken such action in the past, only to see the measure die in the Senate. But an FEPC, Fair Employment Practices Commission, is one of the major demands of the Negro movement, and one of the chief complaints about the President's Civil Rights Program is that it does not presently contain such a provision. Now let's go to the White House and NBC's Sander Van Oker.
This is Sander Van Oker, NBC News at the White House. In approximately 30 minutes, the leaders of the March on Washington will come here to see President Kennedy. The President has watched the march. He watched it this morning and then this afternoon on television during the regular business he conducted. The President last saw many of the leaders of the march on June 22nd, just before he took off for his trip to Western Europe. If the President's talk today is a repetition of that talk, the President will probably listen to the leaders respectfully, and they will demand action on civil rights legislation. And the President, if he outlines the President's congressional strategy, will explain that he has a tax bill which might get ensnarled with the civil rights bill. The President will probably explain that taxes will do more for getting the Negroes the jobs they need than civil rights legislation at this time. but he will promise that civil rights legislation will be passed probably before the end of the year. The problem, as he will explain it, is that if he gets caught in a civil rights filibuster in the Senate, this means that action on the tax cut bill, the tax cut bill, which has already been passed by the House, will be delayed in the Senate, and it might not be passed in time to make it active on January 1st of next year. They will come here, probably spend about an hour with the President. Vice President Johnson will be here with the President. It's also expected the President's brother, the Attorney General, will be here, and Secretary of Labor Willard Wirtz. This is Sandra Van Oker, NBC News at the White House.
One of the several controversies that centered around this march before it was staged in Washington occurred in the inner councils of the AFL-CIO, the major labor organization in the United States to which virtually all unions belong. The question being whether the AFL-CIO should support the march and encourage it to be made. The final decision was that the council would not endorse the march, but individual unions could support it if they so desired. This did not please Walter Reuther, leader of the United Automobile Workers and a vice president of the AFL-CIO. He felt that the parent union was avoiding a moral issue. Reuther was one of the principal speakers at Lincoln Memorial this afternoon. Perhaps, aside from the Reverend Martin Luther King, he drew the greatest response from the audience. We would like now for you to hear the speech by Walter Reuther, which was delivered this afternoon at the Lincoln Memorial with approximately 200,000 persons in attendance.
Brother Randolph, fellow Americans and friends, I am here today with you because with you I share the view that the struggle for civil rights and the struggle for equal opportunity is not the struggle of Negro Americans, but the struggle for every American to join in. For 100 years, the Negro people have searched for first-class citizenship. I believe that they cannot and should not wait until some distant tomorrow. They should demand freedom now, here and now. It is the responsibility of every American to share the impatience of the Negro Americans. And we need to join together, to march together, and to work together until we bridge the moral gap between American democracy's noble promises and its ugly practices in the field of civil rights. American democracy has been too long on pious platitudes and too short on practical performance in this important area. Now, one of the problems is what I call that there is too much high-octane hypocrisy in America. There is a lot of noble talk about brotherhood, and then some Americans drop the brother and keep the hood. To me, the civil rights question is a moral question which transcends partisan politics. And this rally today should be the first step in a total effort to mobilize the moral conscience of America and to ask the people in Congress of both parties to rise above their partisan differences and enact civil rights legislation now. Now, President Kennedy has offered a comprehensive but moderate bill. That bill is the first meaningful step. It needs to be strengthened. It needs FEPC and other stronger provisions. And the job question is crucial because we will not solve education or housing or public accommodations as long as millions of Americans, Negroes, are treated as second-class economic citizens and denied jobs. And as one American, I take the position, if we can have full employment and full production for the negative ends of war, then why can't we have a job for every American in the pursuit of peace? And so our slogan has got to be fair employment, but fair employment within the framework of full employment so that every American can have a job. I am for civil rights as a matter of human decency, as a matter of common morality. But I am also for civil rights because I believe that freedom is an indivisible value, that no one can be free unto himself. And when Bull Connor with his police dogs and fire hoses destroys freedom in Birmingham, he is destroying my freedom in Detroit. And let us keep in mind, since we are the strongest of the free nations of the world, since you cannot make your freedom secure, excepting as we make freedom universal so all may enjoy its blessings, let us understand that we cannot defend freedom in Berlin so long as we deny freedom in Birmingham. This rally is not the end, it's the beginning. It's the beginning of a great moral crusade to arouse America to the unfinished work of American democracy. The Congress has to act, and after they act, we have much work to do in the vineyards of American democracy in every community. Men of goodwill must join together, men of all races and creed and color and political persuasion, and motivated by the spirit of human brotherhood, we must search for answers in the light of reason through rational and responsible action. Because if we fail, the vacuum of our failure will be filled by the apostles of hatred who will search in the dark of night, and reason will yield to riots, and brotherhood will yield to bitterness and bloodshed, and we will tear asunder the fabric of American democracy. So let this be the beginning of that great crusade to mobilize the moral conscience of America so that we can win freedom and justice and equality and first-class citizen for every American, not just for certain Americans, not only in certain parts of America, but in every part of America, from Boston to Birmingham, from New York to New Orleans, and from Michigan to Mississippi. Thank you.
Labor leader Walter Reuther as he addressed the mass meeting at Lincoln Memorial in Washington this afternoon. And now let's check in with NBC's Martin Agronsky at the point where the march began, the Washington Monument.
These are the grounds at the Washington Monument, the area known as the Ellipse. The monument thrusts skyward there at the top of a gently swelling mound of grass, and this is where the march began this morning. Just before dawn, the marchers began to assemble here, first in a trickle of hundreds, then by the thousands, till by 11 this morning, some 5 hours ago, they stood almost shoulder to shoulder, nearly 200,000 strong, ready to make the long walk down Constitution Avenue to the Lincoln Memorial. There were thousands who couldn't crowd into the memorial area. And so for the last couple of hours, they've been drifting back here to sit or to lie on the grass, and many are walking slowly back to their buses here and now. Now, this has been a quiet demonstration, as we saw it here at the monument grounds, and in every sense, a nonviolent one. And the passionate intensity of the Negro Americans' feelings that led to this massive gathering was visible here only in the strong action language of the slogans written on the signs that many held aloft. We demand equal rights now was the burden, the theme, the recurrent slogan of them all. Equal rights now was the key of this assembly. And full equality now was the recurrent theme of every speech that was spoken here and every song that was sung. Now, there are many white Americans, too, that were in this grouping, enough so that the singer Josephine Baker could validly characterize the crowd as having a salt and pepper look. But this has been predominantly the American Negro's day, and they dominate all that has taken place here. It has been their march on Washington. This is Martin Agronsky, NBC News at the Washington Monument, and now to Ray Shearer at the Lincoln Memorial.
The leaders of this march are now on their way to the White House to see President Kennedy, but among the dignitaries still here is Dick Gregory. Dick, what are your feelings at the end of this long and rather exciting day?
Well, my feelings is, after being here, witnessing this, that as long as there's a man alive on the face of the earth, this day will always be remembered the world over.
What do you think were the high spots?
Well, the high spots, to me, and I think psychologically to many people, this was the first time in the history of this country a group of Negroes have ever been invited anywhere.
Has this been a success by the standards that the leaders had set for themselves before it all began?
Oh, yes. This has been a success in every form. I don't think ever before have you been able to get these many people together from all different walks of life. No one have ever gathered these many people together without promising them anything. We did not come here with no promises. Not even did we know where we were going to stay, if we would have enough food, if we'd have enough water. And to sit and look at something that has lasted all day long with as much love and as much feeling as this have, definitely has been a success.
What do you think the day has accomplished for the movement?
I think this day, not only for the movement, but for America. I think peoples all over the world will know how loyal the Negro is to America, how much we feel towards the problems here, how much we feel towards America, because this is a heck of a thing for peoples all over the world to see the pictures coming out from Birmingham, hearing some of the Southerners make the nasty remarks they make, and to be able to witness something like this, the people that's being prosecuted against, with nothing but happiness and joy.
Thank you very much. We've been talking to Dick Gregory, the comedian, here at the Lincoln Memorial.
We have a bulletin from NBC News. The House has just approved the bill providing for compulsory arbitration of the major issues in the railroad work rules dispute. The bill now goes to the White House, to President Kennedy, for his expected signature. And the president's action will end the threat of a nationwide railroad strike, which had been scheduled for 12:01 in the morning. So there will be no railroad strike. The massive march on Washington is virtually over. The crowds are spilling away from the Lincoln Memorial and away from the Washington Monument, going back down Constitution Avenue and boarding their buses and heading homeward. Thousands others trekking back toward Union Station to take trains and go home. The leaders of the Civil Rights March, scheduled to meet with the president in a few moments, are arriving at the White House. To NBC's Sander Van Oker. This, as we understand it, is a group of leaders, Negro and white, who arranged and staged the March on Washington, beginning to arrive at the White House for an appointment with President Kennedy at 5 o'clock this afternoon, which is a matter of some 10 or 11 minutes away. Back what seems a great long while ago now, back in July, when this march was first announced, it had been said that the mass meeting itself would be staged in front of the White House and that a statement there would be issued there by the Negro leaders. This was tempered considerably over the months, and as it finally evolved, it was arranged for a delegation of the leaders to meet with the president. And they will meet with him as they met with leaders of the Senate and the House. Represented in the gathering were leaders of both parties as well, to make their desires and wishes known. They have said that they will say to President Kennedy in their meeting with him essentially what they said to the congressional leaders this morning. And that is that they want the civil rights program passed, but they also want it enlarged in scope and strengthened. The principal additions that they would like to have made would be a Fair Employment Practices Commission, which would outlaw discrimination in employment and permit the Attorney General to move in civil rights areas where he is now not permitted by law. Now to NBC's Sander Van Oker.
NBC News at the White House. We're waiting the arrival of the leaders of the Negro. This is Sander Van Oker, NBC News at the White House. The leaders of the march are now coming down the northwest driveway of the White House. They'll shortly be going in to see the president. As reported a few minutes ago, the president will be joined by the Secretary of Labor, W. Willard Wirtz, and the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Burke Marshall. There's also a possibility that Attorney General Robert Kennedy will be in on the meeting. After the meeting's over, we're told there'll be a presidential statement. Escorting the leaders in is Mr. Lewis Martin, who's the vice chairman, a Negro, a vice chairman of the Democratic National Committee. They are being led by Walter Reuther of the UAW, Martin Luther King, James Farmer. Mr. Reuther just said Whitney Young of the Urban League. They are now being greeted by David Powers, the White House receptionist. As they walked in, Walter Reuther, the president of the UAW, said to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, everything was perfect, just perfect. And now coming in last is the acknowledged leader of the march, Mr. A. Philip Randolph. They've all gone in now to the lobby of the White House, where in a few minutes they'll be taken into the President's office. As we said before, the President will be joined by the Secretary of Labor, W. Willard Wirtz, the Assistant Secretary, Attorney General for Civil Rights, Burke Marshall, and possibly the Attorney General himself, Robert Kennedy. They'll be in there approximately 40 minutes to an hour, and after the meeting, a presidential statement, we're told, will be issued. We're told, however, the President will not read it himself. It'll be issued through the White House press office. This is Sandra Van Oker, NBC News at the White House.
This is not the first time that some of these Negro leaders have met with the President in Washington in this summer of 1963. Back earlier in the summer, A. Philip Randolph, who is the acknowledged leader of the March on Washington idea, met with the President, and at that time, and in lieu of assurances as to the exact nature and scope of the march, the President was skeptical about it, and he voiced this skepticism to Randolph and suggested that perhaps the march should not be held, that Congress, as he was to say publicly later, should be allowed to freely work its will. We're told that Randolph replied at that time, Mr. President, the choice is between a controlled and nonviolent demonstration and an uncontrolled and violent one. In other words, excluding the possibility that the march would not be held at all. Now the attention is again shifting to Union Station in Washington as the vanguard of these 200,000 marchers are trying to leave the nation's capital. So for the situation there, let's check in with NBC's Bryson Rash at Union Station.
The expected crush has occurred here at the Union Station at Washington, D.C. In a matter of some 4 hours this morning, 25,000 people poured through these great portals to attend the Freedom March, and they're going to try to move them out of Washington, D.C. and through Union Station in 3 hours. And there just aren't that many tracks available. But the crowd is taking it in very good humor, very good nature, and they are apparently orderly. They're having fun, they're enjoying the going home part of it, at least in spite of the fact that they're a little bit tired, that their feet might hurt a little bit, but in any event, they seem to be enjoying themselves, as you can see here in your camera. It's a very high-spirited crowd and orderly and enjoying it and full of good humor. And incidentally, they're a very rugged group of people, too, because the health department and the Red Cross report to me that they've had nothing much more or less than a number of headaches and a few bits of tension. You can see the gates opening for the first trains that are going to depart, carrying their passengers back home. First trains will go up into Newark, into New York, and then into Connecticut and Springfield. They're opening the gates early so that they can relieve some of the pressure of the crowd as it gathers here at Union Station and makes its way home.
King Spark says goodbye.
It's a good-natured crowd, and they're enjoying themselves a great deal. Some 25,000 people came through here this morning, and now they're going to go home. This is Bryson Rash reporting from Union Station.
Two big questions, one considerably larger than the other, hung over this march on Washington. One, would there be violence? Two, would a nationwide railroad strike strand thousands of the participants in the nation's capital? During the course of the day, both questions have been answered. So far, there has been nothing even approaching violence, and legislative action has been completed to prevent a nationwide railroad strike. It now merely requires the President's signature. But for a detailed report on that, let's go to Capitol Hill and NBC's Robert Abernathy.
The vote in the the House on the railroad bill just a few minutes ago was 286 to 66. The Senate passed the same bill yesterday, so Congress has headed off a railroad strike. President Kennedy is expected to sign the new bill into law within 2 hours. Then the civil rights marchers, among others, can get home tonight. The railroads cannot put in the new work rules, and the unions need not and cannot strike. What this new bill, about to become a law, does is set up a 7-man panel to arbitrate the two major issues in the railroad dispute. Those two issues have been the question of firemen on diesel locomotives and the question of the makeup of train crews. All again and again throughout the hearings here, spokesmen for both management and labor told congressmen and senators that if those two issues could be solved, all the rest of the issues would fall into line. So what Congress has done is take these people at their word and say, all right, we will have compulsory arbitration on these two issues and these two issues alone. Arbitration to be in effect for 2 years, and then you work out the other issues. There can be a strike if there continues to be disagreement on the other issues. There can be a strike because of the secondary issues after 6 months. But there can't be a strike because of the two primary issues for 2 years. Congress was very busy this afternoon while the civil rights demonstration was going on at the Lincoln Memorial. The question, of course, is what effect did that demonstration have here on the prospects for a strong civil rights bill? Again and again, people to whom we have talked have said the answer is probably no effect at all. The demonstration was peaceful. If there had been violence, it would have had an adverse effect. But since it was peaceful, it probably just didn't change any votes. This is Robert Abernethy, NBC News at the Capitol.
It's almost over, the march on Washington. Stragglers are still coming away from Lincoln Memorial and moving toward the collection points to board their buses. Buses that will either take them back to their homes or transportation provided to get them to the Union train station in Washington or to the airline terminals. This shot now from the Lincoln Memorial back to the Washington Monument in the background shows that it is considerably different than it was just a few minutes ago when upwards of 200,000 persons were gathered there. Leaders of the civil rights demonstration or march are now meeting with President Kennedy at the White House, where they are emphasizing their desire for not only his civil rights program, but a strengthened version of it. And they have urged all the people to be out of Washington by 8 o'clock this evening if they possibly can, and urged them as well to take their battle back to where they came from and continue their protest demonstrations, their sit-in campaigns, their freedom rides, their direct action campaigns, until, as they say, every vestige of discrimination is eliminated from every corner, nook, and cranny of American life. NBC's coverage will continue in just a moment. This is Frank McGee, NBC News.